Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. This is another edition of How to Maintain Happiness Throughout Your Life. In this discussion, I'd like to discuss Habit 1 of Steven Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This habit is called Be Proactive. So I'm going to start the slideshow and we'll dive into it. Slow slideshow, start from first slide. So throughout the book, not just in Habit 1, but he refers to this throughout the book. He calls it Be Proactive or Proactivity. And in reading it in the first chapter, it wasn't the first chapter, but it was the first habit, I interpret it to mean it's about being responsible. Taking responsibility for what happens in your life. The less, let me phrase it this way, the less you blame your circumstances on other people and other things, the more proactive you can be about what happens in your life. Now, granted, I'm not saying you have control over everything. We don't. And he will get into that. We don't have control over everything, but it's really what being proactive is expanding those areas of our life over which we can take responsibility. So he starts off the chapter talking about self-awareness, and he does say a thing: we are not our feelings and we are not our thoughts, which if you've listened to my other podcasts, you'll know that I'm a sort of amateur Buddhist, and this is a very Buddhist concept. That's what Buddhists believe: is we are not our feelings and we are not our thoughts, which I found very interesting because if you know, which I did read up a little bit about Steven Covey, he taught at the Brigham Young University. And his training is he's a Mormon, or was a Mormon. He's no longer alive now, but he was a Mormon. But I found it very interesting that he's bringing in these Buddhist concepts into his book. And then he talks about the social mirror. And in reading the book, I have to say, it sounded to me like Steven Covey was a bit of a rebel. He did not follow the grain of mainstream society. If you read this book, he says, forge your own path. And I thought, wow, that I respect that. And that's something I encourage. I'm like that. I do not follow societal norms. And I don't go along with the flow of what society thinks. I like to forge my own path, and I encourage everyone to do that. We're all individuals in this world, and we all have our own individual contributions to society and society at large. So, and then in the next thing, he talks about, if you listen to the overview, he talked about maps. So maps are basically our conception of how we think the world should work. And then he talks about social maps. So, and of course, we've all heard about the nature versus nurture argument. My personal feeling is that one is not greater than the other. I think they both contribute to how we turn out in life. And then I don't know where he got the third one, but he talks about environmental determinism, which is basically our relationships with other people. So here, when we are proactive, we subordinate our impulses to our values, right? So basically, in a nutshell, I would say this is thinking before you act, right? But if we don't think before we act, we're driven by our feelings, circumstances, conditions, environment. Then we're just reactive, right? So, and then he talks about, and this is, I would say, even for myself, and even today, to this very day, I have a hard time accepting the fact that how my life turned out today is a result of the choices I made prior to today. And granted, yes, there are circumstances beyond our control. I was not born into wealth. My family was very, very poor. I was raised by a single mother in social housing growing up. So, but I didn't let that define my life. But I certainly, as hard as it is for me to accept, and I think for many people to accept, I think there is truth to that. And that ties into that being responsible for ourselves. Is that how my life turned out today is a result of the choices I've made in the past. So, and then he talks about Viktor Frankl. I will get into Viktor Frankl's book in the future. I'll do a brief summary if you don't know who Viktor Frankl is. Viktor Frankl is a Jewish man who had experience in the Nazi concentration camps. Horrible life. I think he lost a lot of his family, and then I think he was fairly young while he was going through that experience. I can't remember how young, but he eventually got his PhD in psychology, and he wrote a book called, don't quote me on this, I think it's called The Meaning of Life or something. The Man's Search for Meaning, I think it is. So it's a great book. But then he talks about three values that we have. So we have our experiential values, what happens to us. Creative values, that which we create, and attitudinal. And of course, having just listened to his story, this is important. How do we respond to difficult situations? Because for most of us, including myself, we can only imagine what it must have been like living in a concentration camp. All I can say is that the truth is, I have no idea. I have no idea how that would have felt. All I can do is just listen to people's stories. And then he talks about you always use language that empowers us. And I don't want empowerment to be misconstrued, because it's not just about building up our confidence. In this context, it means rather than building up our confidence, I would contrast this with using language that does not reduce our responsibility for what happens. So Steven Covey talks about circle of influence, and I would paraphrase that as expanding the areas and aspects of your life over which you will take responsibility for. So, and then he goes into three types of control that we have when facing a problem. And just to reiterate, there are problems that happen. We can't control the economy. If the economy has a downturn and we get laid off, there's nothing we could have done about that. However, I would argue that there are things we could do to mitigate the consequences of getting laid off. But then let's look at the other two. And this is, I'm going to tie that into the 7 habits. So we have problems which involve our own behavior, problems over which we have direct control. And if you go back to the overview, the first 3 habits actually discuss that. Those are the personal victories or the internal habits that we have. So habits 1, 2, and 3 address direct control. The indirect control is problems which involve other people's behavior. That's habits 4, 5, and 6 are public victories. Now, I don't want people to get the impression that in reading this book, you'll have a better ability to manipulate other people. Steven Covey was not all about that. He was about building true and authentic relationships. So yeah, he would have never ever encouraged people to use these. And I don't know if you even really can when when you watch the other videos about habits 4, 5, and 6, you'll see that they're not really things you could use anyhow to manipulate other people. So, and then he does go on to how I'm paraphrasing here, but to move your experiential states from the future into the present, right? So what we often do, and I will return to this many times, is we put conditions on our happiness. So I will be happy when I'm not arguing with my spouse, or when I make more money, or when I live in a better house, or on and on and on and on. These are things that we put off into the future, that we say, okay, well, my present state won't be happier, I guess, or in a certain way until a certain event happens in the future. So we want to take those things and bring it into the present. So this is, I'm trying to think of the book there, that Untethered Soul, I think, discusses this. Is that in Untethered Soul, you have the choice of being happy regardless of your circumstances in life. So in the current moment, I can be, or I will be, more patient. I will be more kind. I will be more loving. We have that choice. And then the other thing too, actually, before I get to this slide, is that he states we are free to choose our actions, but not free to choose the consequences of those actions. Right? So, and again, this comes into responsibility. So we can, and sometimes, yeah, I would argue that we can't always predict the consequences of our actions. All we can do is just learn from it, right? So when something goes wrong and a consequence happens that we weren't expecting, right, we can acknowledge, okay, so maybe I misread the situation or something like that, or maybe I even made a mistake. And if that happens, just acknowledge that a mistake was made, or you misunderstood or something like that. Then you can correct it, and then you can learn from it. So, and then this is getting back into the whole fundamental idea of this book, is that we don't want to work on skills and techniques. This book is not about that. It's about really building core values, fundamental truths. And if we live in harmony with those fundamental truths, or what he calls principles, for the most part, again, going back to we can't control all the consequences. For the most part, we should find that there are more positive consequences than negative consequences. And that if we live in violation of our fundamental principles, then on the whole, we're going to have more negative consequences. So then we'll get into this. So Martin Seligman, he was a researcher in what they call positive psychology. This is psychology about what makes people happy. And he says there are three things that contribute to happiness. Genetics, which is temperament. Psychology does bear that out, that some people are just generally happy, or regardless of what happens in their life, and some people are just generally miserable. Circumstances, definitely to a certain extent, because this is the area over which you don't have control, right? So losing your job, you don't have control over that. It's not your choice. And then the third thing is things you can control, right? And I would argue that the more things over which you have control, the more likely you are to be happier about your life. So again, maximize your responsibility. So I think that's pretty much all it. So I'm going to turn off the slides now. So basically, just in a nutshell, think about all the choices that you can be responsible over, and try to expand that. He calls it circle of influence. I'll call it circle of responsibility. So, thank you for listening. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, then uh, please hit the like button. That lets other people know that this might be something that's interesting to watch. And if you're finding these videos helpful, then you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button. So, thanks for listening. Don't know when I can get to it, but as soon as I can, we'll release a video on habit two rather, not habits, but habit two. And then over the next little while, I'll work through the habits 2 through 7. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.